Welcome, this is Rick Seymour. Thanks for joining me while I talk about my absolutely favorite subject, which is sports nutrition. Whether you're just starting out on an exercise program, you're physically active, you're a weekend warrior, or an elite athlete, I think you're going to find that these concepts and these products can have a dramatic influence on your performance. One of the things that I think is so extraordinary about the ability to share this with you tonight is that there are several arenas in which Shaklee Corporation has been involved for a significant length of time that I'm going to share with you. But in order to really understand sports nutrition, there are several things that we need to pay attention to. First of all, the nutritional foundation, and it all starts with just good nutrition, whether you're an athlete or not. We'll talk about the role of protein, carbohydrates, fluids, how to recover fast, efficiently, and pain-free, and especially injury-free, and then how to put the whole package together so it can really work for you regardless of what level you're at. I think one of the things that is so significant and extraordinary, though, is that sometime back, Time Life put out a book called The 25 Greatest Adventures of All Time. We had nothing to do with the publication of that book, and yet 7 of those 25 adventures where people were pushing the human performance envelope, if you will, were powered by Shaklee Nutrition. Not coincidentally, for 30 years we have been associated with the U.S. Olympians in the ski team, in the snowboard team, and many other sports. And over the years, Shaklee Olympians have accumulated 105 medals. 60 of those are gold. And in the last Winter Olympics, of the 28 medals the U.S. won, 21 of those were Shaklee-powered athletes. So you have to recognize that people who can use anything on this planet they want to use, that they know is safe, is clean, will enhance their performance, they show up on Shaklee's doorstep over and over. 2 people in particular I think are significant. Gary Hall was a type 1 diabetic. Everybody said he would never compete on the world stage, and yet here he is with a 50-meter freestyle gold medal in Athens. He attributes it to Shaklee Nutrition. Cam Bostic is a cyclist, and he qualified for the U.S. Olympic team at age 47. Most cyclist careers are over at 32 or 33 years old. At age 47, he makes the team. He attributes it to Shaklee Nutrition. We've worked with NASA since 1993 for the rehydration drink that the astronauts have used. They call it Astro 8. We call it Performance, the same thing that you can be using yourself. And here's the last and final shuttle mission with Commander Mark Kelly, where he's got his Shaklee Vitalizer floating in space right next to him. He wouldn't go anywhere without this. And the next time somebody tells you Shaklee's out of this world, trust me, it's out of this world. But I think the thing that I get so excited about is I've used Shaklee after I started doing all of these things, as well as having done them before Shaklee. I can see the difference and have seen the difference in very dramatic ways, both before and after adequate sports nutrition. I've climbed all 54 of the 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado in the summer and the winter, and most of those were solo because I couldn't find anybody else crazy enough to do it with me. I climbed the Matterhorn in Switzerland a couple of times. I got 3 first ascents in the Coast Range of British Columbia, peaks that had never been climbed before. I've ridden 79 centuries, 8 double centuries. Those are 100-mile and 200-mile bike rides, and the triple bypass here in Colorado. I've done a lot of extreme skiing, but I think my biggest claim to fame is with 4 kids, 9 grandkids, and 2 great-granddaughters, my wife and I still run rings around people half our age. Most of the grandparents I know, when the grandkids leave after the weekend, they collapse in the easy chair. They go, oh, thank God that's over with. And in our family, it's the grandkids who are going, oh, thank God that's over with. Because I'm taking them on 60-mile bike rides, running them up 14,000-foot peaks, 3-day backpacking trips, and I don't know a lot of grandparents that do that kind of stuff. But let's talk about what we need to be looking at in order to perform our best, to have the highest performance we possibly can, the best endurance, recover quickly. And it starts with a good, solid nutritional foundation. And the challenge is most people in this country are not getting it. Here's a fascinating study done with a women's collegiate basketball team living in an athletic dorm with an on-staff dietitian that had designed and had prepared 3 balanced meals a day for these women athletes. How many of us have access to that kind of ease of 3 balanced meals a day? And yet, looking at the red line there, you will notice that in those major categories of nutrients, most of the women fell about 50% of the recommended daily allowance. Now, if you can't get it with that kind of convenience, with somebody preparing your food for you, the odds are today you can't get it. In fact, when we were working with the U.S. ski team, the women on the team consume 5,000 calories a day. That's almost 3 times what the amount of food the typical American woman consumes. And on that amount of food, every one of them was deficient in calcium and iron. The point is, if you can't get it on 5,000 calories a day, you can't get it today out of your diet. And if you look at the various nutrients that are required for good performance from a physical perspective, notice on the left-hand side the various categories that we're concerned about. And here are all the nutrients that we need to pay attention to. And if you look at all the foods from which these things come, one of the things you'll notice from the list is there are very few people who on a consistent basis consume any significant quantities of the kinds of things that we know can provide basic nutrients for us. So the challenge becomes we're going to have to supplement intelligently. We need a good protein source, preferably without all the fat typically associated with meat. And Shaklee has an amazing soy protein they've had for many years, as well as an extraordinary new product called Shaklee 180. We need a multivitamin mineral supplement as a basic foundation. We need B-complex because it's involved in the Krebs cycle, which converts carbohydrates to energy. We absolutely have to have adequate vitamin E for circulation and appropriate cardiovascular performance, as well as vitamin C to strengthen our immune system, because when we stress our bodies with exercise, we can deplete the immune system to where we're more susceptible to being sick. In many cases, those of you who might suffer any kind of leg cramping, Charlie horses, that kind of thing, it's almost a guarantee you're deficient in calcium and magnesium. So OsteoMatrix and VitalMag are appropriate for that, and virtually all men need to replace zinc if they're out there perspiring and sweating at any significant level. Zinc has very little to do with your actual performance, but guess what? It's linked to a deficiency of zinc and prostate cancer later in life. So we got to make sure we do that. But if you're going to supplement your diet intelligently, get a good basic foundational nutritional program, the question is, why would you choose Shaklee? Well, I think it's pretty simple, because there really is a Shaklee difference. We've done more clinical research than the sum total of every other company in our industry. These products have been tested and proved in clinical situations that they are bioavailable, meaning it gets into your bloodstream to do what it's supposed to do. And it's been proven by hundreds and hundreds of world-class athletes for many, many years. You're going to find that quite often people opt for things that really are not going to build their health because they don't have the quality, they don't have the science, and they don't have the research that Shaklee has behind their products. And a good basic foundation would start with Shaklee's Vitalizer. This came out of the landmark study that was done by UC Berkeley School of Public Health, in which they compared people who had used Shaklee supplements for 20 years or more to those people who either used no supplements or used other brands of multivitamins. And it turns out that the Shaklee group was dramatically healthier in virtually every type of cardiovascular health, emphysema, type 2 diabetes, the list goes on and on and on. These products have an impressive impact on people's overall health, even before you start talking about exercise. So what I want you to recognize is out of that study came some very dramatic differences, because what turned out was that the average age of the Shaklee people in that study was 63 years old. People using other brands besides Shaklee was 58. People who were using no supplements at all, it was 53. So we were 10 years older than this group, 5 years older than this group, and everything else being equal, you would have expected the Shaklee people to have more health problems just because we were significantly older. But I want you to look at these numbers because they are dramatic. Diabetes, 2.9% of the Shaklee population versus 11.1 and 8.5. That's almost 4 times higher and 3 times higher. Not 5 or 10 or 15%. We're talking 300% and 400% differences. Heart attacks, 2.5% versus 7.6 and 4.4. Congestive heart failure, 1.4 versus 2.8 and 3.5. In other words, double and almost triple. Right down the list in every case, stroke, coronary heart disease, emphysema. What you see is that the Shaklee group is dramatically healthier than the other two groups. But I want you to notice what is also highlighted in yellow. What you will see is that people taking no supplements at all had better health than the people taking other brands besides Shaklee. You may think you can run into Costco and buy some store brand and save a few bucks, but ultimately it will cost you your health, because it turns out that for diabetes, heart attacks, stroke, and coronary heart disease, people taking nothing had better health than people taking other brands besides Shaklee. There really is a Shaklee difference. So let's talk about who's going to need extra protein, because that's an arena we have to pay close attention to as we up our exercise routine or we exercise at high levels. Because anybody who's just starting a program, anybody who's a calorie-restricted athlete, that would include like high school wrestlers, dancers, endurance athletes, people who are out there for anything over an hour, anybody engaged in heavy physical training, weightlifters, bodybuilders, all of those people have an extra need for protein above and beyond what we'd normally consider a typical diet. Now, how much protein is enough? Well, take a typical male. The formula goes like this. You take body weight times 0.8, that's the number of grams of protein today. So if you have a 200-pound male, that's 160 grams a day of protein. Where are you going to get it from your diet? Well, half a cup of red beans is 22 grams. So that means you've got to eat, what does that look like? 8 cups of red beans, and that's before they're cooked. A hamburger, a quarter pounder, is 20 grams. That's 8 quarter-pound hamburgers a day, and of course you're going to get all the fat and everything else that goes with it. One thigh of chicken is 15 grams. That's like 11 chicken thighs a day. The list goes on, and what you're going to notice is it's difficult for most people to get the amount of protein they require who are physically active. And yet, in Shaklee's Energizing Soy Protein, there are 14 grams of protein in one serving with only 110 calories, 1 gram of fat, and 0 grams of cholesterol. In our 180 smoothie, there are 16 grams of protein in just 170 calories, 3 grams of fat, and 0 cholesterol. These are two of the most superb sources of protein that you can get into your diet without all the associated fat that typically comes with the meat that people consume to get their protein. It's part of a good, solid nutritional foundation. Combine one of those with Vitalizer and you're off to a great start. Well, let's see some of the research that's been done with these products and what the effect on exercise is. In this particular study done by Wayne Westcott, professor at Quincy College, who, by the way, has authored 24 fitness books and a lot of different publications. This is a 6-month study to determine the effects of moderate exercise and the 180 smoothies on body composition. This was 68 middle-aged adults, 1.5 serving post-exercise of the 180 smoothies, and here's what happened. The people who were using the smoothies versus the people who just exercised had significantly more weight loss, increased their lean muscle mass, which as we age is critical to maintaining our health, and body fat dropped dramatically more than the other two groups. In other words, compared to exercise alone, by adding the smoothies, they had better weight loss, an increase in lean muscle, and an increase in fat loss, especially for those concerned about losing weight. It was published in Fitness Management. Another study that was done added both the Shaklee smoothies and the Vitalizer. This was a 9-month study in older adults where they exercised 2 to 3 days per week. They had a placebo group who thought they were taking supplements, plus the exercise. They had just an exercise group, and those who added the exercise with the smoothies and the Vitalizer, and the difference was significant. First of all, what you're going to see is that the resting diastolic blood pressure in the control group, interestingly enough, it actually increased instead of decreased in the control group. The exercise group, it decreased slightly, but in the exercise plus nutrition group, it decreased dramatically by adding nutrition to exercise. But another one that was so significant is that the bone density, there was actually a bone density loss in the control group, a very slight loss in the exercise-only group, but in the exercise plus nutrition group, there was a 1% increase in bone density, and most physicians, most of the medical profession will tell you that at middle age you cannot increase bone density, and yet with exercise and Shaklee nutrition, it increased 1% in just that short period of time. These products make a huge difference, not just in elite athletes, but in anybody who is physically active. That one was published in the Journal of Exercise Physiology. These are extraordinary studies because they point out the fact Shaklee supplements have a dramatic effect on people's overall health, whether they exercise or not. But let's talk about what other competitors' products are like, because the Shaklee difference is real, folks. Most companies have little to no quality control, and yet Shaklee does over 100,000 quality control tests per year, over 278 on just the raw materials. I'll come back to that a couple of times because this is significant. Because, for example, in Consumer Reports, they reported that EAS Myoplex Original Dark Chocolate Shake and 2 versions of Muscle Milk chocolate drinks had high levels of arsenic, cadmium, and lead. That would never happen in the Shaklee supplement because we do 278 tests for those kinds of things to make sure they're not present in the raw materials. GNC has a product called C4 Extreme, which contains DMMA. It's a decongestant that can cause heart failure. It has been banned by the FDA, and yet GNC continues to sell that product. Of 58 brands of protein drinks on the market, 25% had steroid contamination and 11% for other banned substances that would never happen with a Shaklee product because we make sure they do not exist in the raw materials. You'll find that the U.S. Olympic team's party line is they do not want their athletes taking supplements for these very reasons, that they can get banned from their sport because things they're taking they think are healthy, they think are natural, they think are good for them, actually have contaminants in them that will cause them to lose their place on the Olympic team. And yet for 30 years, we've been nutritional consultants, the U.S. ski team and U.S. snowboarding, because they know these products are clean, they're safe, and they work. Of 10 brands of omega-3s, there's a lawsuit against them right now because they all contain PCBs and or mercury. The top 10 brands, you would recognize every single one of them. That would never happen in a Shaklee product because of the quality control. We found carcinogenic fungicides in ginseng in one of our major herbal products. Before we ever put it into the marketplace, we rejected those crops for 2 years, and yet every crop we rejected was bought by other companies and sold to the American public. Of 324 prenatal and children's vitamins tested by the FDA, 100% contain lead, every single one. That would never happen with a Shaklee supplement. 90% of the ingredients used by other manufacturers come from China. What is your comfort level with the quality and the cleanness of products coming out of China? If they don't do the kind of quality control tests that Shaklee does and nobody else does, you have no idea what you're consuming. So I guess the bottom line is, who do you trust? And there really is not another company out there like Shaklee. Now let's talk very specifically about some things that we can do to enhance our performance regardless of what level we're at. Because anything over 45 minutes, endurance becomes an issue. And you have to accomplish 2 things simultaneously. You have to replace the fluids at the same rate you lose them so you don't become dehydrated. And you have to replace your glycogen stores at the same rate you expend it so you don't hit the wall or bonk. So how do we do that? Let's start with the fluids. It turns out that if you lose just 2% of your body weight in fluid, you already have discomfort and weakness. You can detect it subjectively. At 4%, you have poor concentration and you increase your heart rate dramatically. At 6%, you become disoriented. At 8%, we can call you dead. And here's the challenge. Your thirst mechanism is a very inefficient indicator of fluid loss because it turns out that the minute your thirst mechanism turns on, what happens is that you start drinking water. And if you drink just water by itself, you'll replace about 50% when your thirst mechanism shuts off and you think you've replaced the fluid you need, when in reality you continue to dehydrate. That's one of the reasons that electrolytes are added to sports drinks. But unfortunately, some companies overdo it for marketing purposes. I'll explain that in a moment. But if you add sufficient electrolytes to it, it maintains your thirst mechanism long enough that you replace all the fluids that you have lost. In a clinical study done with very high-performing athletes, what we found was over a 2-hour period, when they used Shaklee's Performance, which is our rehydration drink, they found that there was no loss of fluids. over time, they drank sufficient amount of fluid of performance to replace the water that they lost, whereas if they drank water over that same period of time, they continued to dehydrate. This is very dramatic. But you also have to recognize at the same time you're replacing fluid, you have to replace your glycogen stores because that's what your muscles are fueled by. Now in your body, you can store about 3 minutes in blood, about 6 minutes in your liver, and 90 minutes in your muscles if you're eating a good, properly balanced diet, which probably does not describe the vast majority of people in this country. So at the most, you could store 99 minutes. Most people in reality can only store about 45 to 60 minutes because of the kind of diet they eat on a day in, day out basis. So if you want to have sufficient endurance, you've got to replace your glycogen stores at the same rate. So you've got to have adequate carbohydrates to start with. How much is enough? Well, take your body weight times 15, and that's how many calories a day you need from carbos just to maintain good athletic performance before we even think about the endurance issue. That's 3,000 calories a day for a 200-pound male. That's 30 servings a day. Where are you going to get that? Well, half a cup of cereal, rice, pasta, or fruit, so that's 15 cups a day. 1 cup of juice or vegetable, that's 30 cups a day. 1 slice of bread, that's like a loaf and a half a day. In other words, again, to get the right balance, the right amount of calories from the right kind of carbohydrates is very difficult, if not impossible, for most people. And yet what we have found is with performance, people actually increase their blood glycogen levels during a 2-hour time period as opposed to drinking just water. My experience with this product was very interesting because I used to ride many centuries long before this became available. And after riding a century, and I've never ridden what I call a recreational century, I get on the bike, I hammer it for 100 miles, and I get off. No stops, no rests, 100 miles. And I always bonked at about 80 miles before this became available. In other words, at about 80 miles, my body's given up. I have no energy left. All of a sudden, it's just a mental exercise to force myself to finish what I said I was going to start. And once performance became available, I never bonked. I could ride the last 20 miles at the same pace I rode the first 20 miles. And that is extraordinarily unusual because in a century ride, you're talking anywhere from 5 to 6 hours of nonstop output. Now, Performance has 67% more muscle fuel than Gatorade, but the other thing they do in Gatorade is they top load it with electrolytes that keep you thirsty longer than you should be. There are people drinking Gatorade that can actually overhydrate because of the imbalance of electrolytes in the product. So at the same time they're overhydrating, they're not getting nearly enough muscle fuel to maintain their endurance. There are dramatic differences in products out there, and Shaklee's Performance is the best balanced product you're ever going to run into. It can have an extraordinary impact on your endurance regardless of what you're doing. But you also have to recover after exercise. And one of the studies that Shaklee did, along with Dr. Ivey at the University of Texas, one of the foremost experts on exercise physiology, is they found, and this was, again was printed and published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, they found that over time, people who, after exercise, replaced either just carbohydrates or just protein had very poor recovery, whereas people using our physique, which is a balance of carbohydrates, appropriate types of protein, long-chain proteins, etc., as well as chromium, it allows your body to replace lean muscle mass very, very quickly and energy at the same time. So the return and the impact of using the physique was dramatically different. My personal experience with that was that when I would finish a century ride, I'd get the bike loaded on the car, I'd drive home the hour, hour and a half, 2 hours from wherever it was, I'd drag myself in the house, didn't have the energy to unload the bike, I would collapse horizontally on the bed, and maybe 2 or 3 hours later, I'd get up, take a shower, and go to bed. And if you said bicycle to me in the next 3 days, I'd probably shove one down your throat. Didn't even want to think about getting back on a bike. And the first time that the physique became available, I used it as directed immediately when I finished, And 2 hours after I finished, I got home that night. I unloaded the bike. I'd never done that before. I walked into the house and I sat down instead of laid down. My wife says, hey, friends called, want to know if we want to come over and watch videos tonight. I went out, got showered. We went over, stayed up till 11 o'clock that night. Got up the next day. I felt so good. I went for a 60-mile bike ride. I had never experienced that kind of recovery even when I was 20 years younger. This is an extraordinary product for anybody who gets out there and really puts it to it. So what you're going to find is that if you have a serving immediately after exercise, a second serving a couple hours later, and for those of people who are trying to put on weight or bulk up, a third serving before bed, it will have a dramatic impact on how you feel. Now, there are a lot of people out there today who seem to rely heavily on energy drinks. And the challenge with energy drinks is that, yes, they can give you some energy, but they give you all kinds of other stuff maybe you don't want so much of. For example, artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, artificial preservatives. They're high in sugar, they're high calories, and they can be a challenge from a health perspective. I've compared Shaklee's new energy chews, these little guys right here, in terms of, and caffeine is the thing that everybody's after in the energy drinks, and I've compared the caffeine content, the calories, the sugar, artificial ingredients or not, and the cost. And what you're going to notice is that, number one, here's the caffeine content of 4 of the most popular ones out there on the market. Here are the number of calories associated with those, anywhere from 110 to 220 calories versus 22 in a Shaklee Energy Chew. The amount of sugar, 3 grams in a Shaklee Energy Chew versus 60 here, 29, 28, and 27. So there's dramatic differences in the amount of sugar in these products. Virtually all of them contain artificial ingredients. And if you look at the actual cost per milligram of caffeine, which is what people are really after, which has a dramatic impact on how focused we are and how energetic we are, if you will, you're going to discover that the cost of Shaklee is comparable to all the rest, not to mention which you don't have to carry a can around in your pocket, just this tiny little chew. It's very convenient. It's easy to carry. No artificial ingredients. It is natural. It does not have the ridiculous amount of sugar and calories that the other products have, but has a significant effect. It's also interesting that our granddaughters take this before exams because they stay much more focused and alert while they're doing that. But for anybody who is using sport drinks right now, this is a terrific alternative to a sport drink. It contains an energy-releasing B vitamins as well as vitamin C and D. It's 75% organic ingredients, which is predominantly organic green tea extract and all organic sweeteners, no artificial sweeteners, flavors, preservatives, and it is gluten-free. It is a superb product. So recognize you have a lot of different choices out there. Shaklee is probably the only choice any of us should make once we understand what is in the other kinds of products that are in the marketplace. But on those rare occasions, for example, if you're, like I am, one of the baby boomers, which if we were honest with ourselves would be calling ourselves the geezer boomers right now, if you tend to overdo it on occasion, we've got an amazing product called Joint and Muscle Pain Cream that the relief is virtually instantaneous. For anybody who suffers from any kind of chronic pain because of overexercise or other challenges you've had as you've matured in your life, we have Pain Relief Complex. And for those of you who have any issues with your joints that falls in the category of osteoarthritis, you're going to find that it has a dramatic effect on that. I was born with a congenital defect where I have no cartilage or synovial fluid in my left ankle. And basically, for the first 50 years of my life, I limped. If I did anything where I stood on my feet more than an hour or two, I went backpacking, I went hiking, I walked, anything over a couple of hours, and I was in excruciating pain more often than not because it was bone on bone. I went to every podiatrist, every sports nutrition I could think of, and they all told me the same thing. Nothing you can do about it. The only option you have is to fuse the joint. You'll have a permanent limp, but it won't hurt so bad. And I thought, well, that's not a good option. And then Shaklee came out with Joint Health Complex. This is the most amazing stuff because as long as I take an adequate amount, no matter how long I'm on my feet, no matter how far I backpack, no matter how long I stand around in the shop all day or do a seminar, I have no joint pain. It is absolutely extraordinary. So let's put it all together. A good basic foundational program is required for good athletic performance, no matter what else you're doing. And a foundational program is Shaklee Vitalizer and one of our protein sources, whether it's the Shaklee Smoothies or the Energizing Soy. If you have any tendency toward stiff muscles, muscle cramping, Charlie horses, you need to add Osteomatrix and VitalMag, and for men, make sure you add zinc. Before exercise, we have a product called Core Energy that can give you a little boost because it increases circulation, or the Energy Chews. And before and during exercise, you can also add the Shaklee Performance. But remember, this is your primary product for endurance, and for recovery, it's all about the physique. Because when you do that well, you won't suffer all the aches and pains, the stiffness, the soreness that normally comes. I mean, I've seen the sticker all my life that says no pain, no gain. Well, guess what? You can gain without the pain if you recover properly and use this amazing product. And when you overdo it, guess what? We've got Joint Muscle Pain Cream, the Pain Relief Complex, or the Joint Health Complex that can help you in several different arenas. So I congratulate you on taking the time to join us tonight. I want you to realize that Shaklee has an amazing program that can help athletes at any level, and you're going to find that the people you work with who are physically active, they have a better read on their bodies than the actual couch potatoes that are out there. And the thing I love about working with athletes is because of that, when they do something right, they know the difference virtually immediately. It only takes a workout or two, a 60-mile ride, an hour run, doing a 10K, and if they do this properly, they will see a dramatic difference from before they use these kinds of products. It's happened to me. It's happened to thousands of other athletes, not to mention many Olympians who have gone out and broken extraordinary records using these products. So thank you again for joining me tonight. I hope you'll share this with everybody in your life that is active, because I know these products can make a huge difference for them as well as you. Good night, everybody.